Well, I know that you've all been looking forward to this one. Episode 3 of High Guardian Spice is probably the most infamous episode of the entire show. This is the first episode that attempts to get into more serious subject matter. We're not going on about cheesecake lockets or a murderous potions instructor anymore. This time the show wants to talk about trans issues. Considering how the show continues to butcher the English language,
you should apologize for that posture, sweetie. You look like an invertebrate.
This can only go so well, and as you might imagine, how they deal with this particular subject matter is only the tip of the iceberg on this awful, awful episode. I've actually been procrastinating writing on the script for quite a bit, because this episode is probably bottom 3 worst of the whole show. And this is largely because it's divided into 3 subplots. Rosemary damages her sword Flowering Thorn and goes to talk to Caroway. Meanwhile, Sage is practicing magic when she accidentally makes her pet Neppycat into a monster and chaos ensues. All while this is going on, we're dealing with Parsley exploring the school's underground, banging shit with a hammer. Episode 3 of High Guardian Spice managed to impress me, because I never thought that I would come across anything that could bungle the idea of a subplot as much as this episode did. Literally 70% of this episode's problems come from the fact that it has subplots. And I know that sounds like a ridiculous and weird criticism. Usually, even a bad subplot is just that. Maybe it's not as good as the A-plot, or it could have nothing to do with the A-plot and just be a distraction. But it's hard to imagine how just having subplots could be so detrimental to an episode. Let's start with the most basic point here. Parsley's plotline in this episode is completely pointless. It has nothing to do with anything. She gets a hammer that is never used for the rest of the series. It is a complete and utter waste of time. Time that this show, and this episode in particular, desperately, desperately needs. I was harsh on Samurai Jack Season 5 for wasting time on Scaramouche, a fan-favorite character. How do you think I feel about High Guardian Spice wasting time on literal filler? Rosemary's plotline not only goes into the backstory about Lavender, her mother, but also reveals that Caroway is trans. Meanwhile, Sage's story starts foreshadowing the overarching plotline of the entire series. And do I even need to say that the A and B plot do not get the time that they need? I'll be going into the plotlines individually, but they all come across as rushed. Very rushed. And that's because this entire episode is edited like a fight scene. Seriously. Editing is one of those things that I never thought that I'd have to complain about in a cartoon. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm not exactly someone who has the right to do that. But I cannot stress how disorienting this episode is. This is the episode that should have been called Disorientation Day, because at points, it's hard to tell what's going on. Once the 3 plots break apart, it's a free-for-all. The show will jump back and forth between the subplots at random for no reason, sometimes only 30 seconds apart. No, this is no exaggeration. And to make matters worse, this episode dedicates some time to flashbacks, which you could consider a 4th separate storyline. I made this chart here because, yes, I am that obsessed. I went through the episode in 15-second intervals, determining whose story was on the screen at that given time. And just look at this mess. Sage's storyline is separated into 6 different chunks. Parsley's subplot is forgotten about for 5 minutes entirely. And yeah, Parsley stuff has the tendency to, once again, last less than 30 seconds. The jumps to each separate storyline are almost random. Lavender and Caroway are running in a flashback, so let's jump to Sage running after Neppycat. Parsley falls down a hole, so let's jump to Rosemary looking shocked. These might have been clever jumps if, once again, it wasn't every 30 seconds. There's actually a Rosemary section I couldn't fit in the chart because it was less than 15 seconds. If you're lucky, we stick to a plot for a full minute, and after the stories diverge, we're never with one for 2 minutes. This is ignoring separate scenes and cuts within each subplot, by the way. Look at this clip here. Why am I showing you this random clip? Because in between these 2 shots of Parsley running through the hallway, we cut to Sage's subplot. The cuts are in completely random places, which leads to the bastardization of the language of cinematography. When you cut to somewhere else, what you're communicating is that a length of time has passed. Parsley falls down a hole. We cut to somewhere else. When we cut back, it subconsciously makes us think that she's been knocked out for a long time, when that probably wasn't true. When Parsley is running, you cut somewhere else and then cut back. It subconsciously makes us think that she's running for a very, very long time, when she's running in just a straight fucking line. Speaking of which, Parsley's subplot supposedly took hours. Rosemary's subplot likely took an hour. And Sage's subplot probably lasted like 10 minutes. That's what the writing, dialogue, and editing all communicate, and yet they all start at the same time and end at the same time. And yes, this is an incredibly obnoxious problem. This is one of the more infamous episodes of the show, and everyone I had watched this with me pointed out this being the biggest problem with the episode. The average scene count for a 22-minute episode is 15. This episode has more than 25, changing scenes an average of every 45 seconds. It's not as bad as Milan 2020, but when an episode is giving me Milan 2020 vibes, That's not a good sign. I had to divide the episode MP4 into separate subplots to keep this review coherent and actually make things possible to edit. Seriously, there's more to editing than just cutting randomly. And with that out of the way, let's deal with Parsley's subplot first.
That's it! I'm getting me mallet!
Have you ever heard of that saying, when all you have is a hammer, the whole world looks like a nail? This isn't a positive saying. It means people who have one trick will try to use that one trick on everything, even if it isn't appropriate to that particular scenario. In this episode, Professor Billy Goat gives Parsley a hammer and tells her that the entire world is a nail. I get the idea. One item can do a lot more than just its specified purpose. But straightening out a portrait, you do that with your hands, not a hammer. The hammer can damage the frame, which looks quite valuable. A pickaxe or a shovel is an appropriate tool in digging. But most egregiously is this moment here. Not one of you can tell me that a dinky little hammer is the right tool to jump over to a nail over a deep pit, especially in a room that has items with longer handles. I suppose this brings me to the fact that this is the second episode in a row where a teacher was almost responsible for a student's death. Seriously, let's go over what happens here. Parsley opens up a secret passageway and falls. That's 5 stories high by my count, onto rocks and stone. There's a good chance that height can kill you, especially if she landed on that fucking hammer. Even if she didn't, she could have broken a bone or gotten a concussion. But no, I guess High Guardian Dwarves' bones are just made of mithril. Yes, it's a cartoon, but it's also a fantasy show, in which injuries should mean something. In episode 5, Sage nearly dies from falling. Either heights are a threat or they're not. Even ignoring that, Billy Goat here has no way to tell if Parsley got lost or otherwise hurt down there, especially since she took a pretty illogical pathway. Parsley could have wandered what looked like the sewers and maybe got to an exit, but no, she decides to randomly discover and then explore an untapped cave. An untapped cave full of... I don't even need to say it.
Who's that Pokemon?
The first time that I showed clips of this scene, you already made the connection in your head. The show calls these trappers, but we all know they're Parasects from Pokemon. Like, really? I mean, trappers glow and Parasects don't, unless they're shiny, but let's just say I wouldn't design my mushroom crabs like this. Nintendo has sued for less legitimate reasons is all I'm saying. My favorite part of this subplot though was at the end, when Parsley is right under the floorboards.
But we still haven't found our way out. Professor Phlox is going to think I'm a real dunce.
You are under the floorboards, holding a hammer, in a busy school.
He was the rudest. He...
If you can't figure this out, Professor Billy Goat had too much confidence in you, I'm sorry to say. Actually, no, my favorite part of the subplot is that it has nothing to do with transformations, the title of the fucking episode.
We escaped the dungeon, we found our way out of that bizarro broom closet, we solved a dozen riddles for the grog mob, saved a hornet's marriage, climbed walls, climbed between walls.
That would be so much more fun to watch then. Sage is trying to learn some new magic.
It's like there's always a cost. But this new magic is so different. This new magic stuff, there is no cost.
Okay, wow. 30 seconds into Sage's plot, and we've already got problems. A lot of problems, actually. Anyone who knows anything about fantasy knows what the problem is immediately. Because when you're learning to write fantasy, this is the first thing that you learn. Do not ever have a magic system that has no cost. Rule number 1, no exceptions. And I mean no exceptions, ever. You do this, you lose. Because when people can do literally anything with magic, they're all basically omnipotent gods. They can solve every problem ever.
They can just do things. Cut their hair. Fly around the world.
Do you know how much instant free transportation would radically alter a society?
Make a castle out of sausages.
Or the total elimination of hunger? How new magic is described here means that every character lives in a post-scarcity society, where no one needs to work because they can just magic up anything they want or need. They're basically all playing life on Minecraft creative mode. If you have magic and you have any problems at all, ever, you are a moron. If you don't have magic, you are even more of a moron, because magic can literally do anything for you, at no cost, as per what Sage says. To give the absolute benefit of the doubt, I don't think that this no-cost thing is completely accurate. First of all,
I'm going to need some cinnamon.
That's a cost, dumbass.
But this new magic is so different. It's like a language I don't understand.
Oh, like English? But beyond that, there's this big overarching plot that there is a rot. It's infecting a tree, which makes time very, very sad. She'd tell us why, but Parsley playing Pokemon was more important than crucial plot details. I infer that this new magic does have a cost, and it's causing the rot. It's not something that's ever outright stated, but I assume that that's something they'd go into more details in a season 2.
If I had one!
They could have done it in season 1, but Parsley falling down a hole was a more valuable usage of their time. In the end, new magic seems to be a half-baked metaphor for industrialization. Everyone is using new magic that can do things so much easier and better and cheaper than old magic, but new magic ends up rotting the earth, and no one knows or cares about the consequences before it's too late. And keep in mind, I'm giving the show the benefit of the doubt here. None of this is ever stated. This is just what I was able to put together through cobbled pieces. It's essentially me theorizing. None of this could have been planned. It's just the only thing that makes sense to me. As for what they do establish...
Some spheres grant eternal life. That's a bit much.
The secret to eternal life and High Guardian spice is in a first-year student's textbook. The show gives out baffling lore drops like candy on Halloween. In the world of High Guardian spice, death is optional. I bet you didn't know that because this factoid never shows up again. This isn't funny or cute. All it does is stop the pace dead in its tracks because your audience is forced to go, what? You can't just drop eternal life as a background joke, like it's no big deal. It's a very big deal. The dialogue is still atrocious, by the way.
I grew up watching my mother use her body to pull magic from the earth.
Giving new meaning to the term tree hugger since 2019.
When I'm done with this spell, you're going to be able to speak at least 5 words. You can choose which ones. No swears.
Yeah, this is a kid's show after all. Then Amarilla shows up and causes chaos when she gets Sage's pussy wet. It makes Neppy Cat large, allows him to speak, and...
I have got some opinions.
Gives him a Twitter account. So the cat gets out of the bag, and the others chase him into the courtyard. Huh, I guess absolutely no teachers right now are next to a window in which they can hear this chaos going on.
Why am I even here?
Every time I watch this episode, I have to stop it right here, because that is actually a very good question. Amaryllis doesn't care about what's going on. Sage is not forcing her to come along. She is just there, going with Sage, for reasons. Then time actually does something for once in the series.
Is it dead?
No, these arrows are tipped with napping potion.
Got it, everyone? Arrows tipped with napping potion absolutely cannot kill, even if they pierce the heart. Why do you even have those on standby? It's a very specific thing to tip arrows with. So Neppy Cat stabs a tree and gets shot. Apparently either everyone knew that the cat would just go back to normal size, or no one objected to possibly killing it. Sage chews out Amaryllis, and then this happens. This is the funniest part of the episode. Sage is just yelling, and this makes Snapdragon have a crush on her. Not just yelling, but yelling at Snapdragon's best friend. To say this scene is weird is an understatement. This kind of thing usually happens the first time the characters see each other, the first time they lock eyes. But no, Sage yelling is what makes the crush click. What even is this? Isn't this fun? Going on about cat attacks and dwarves catching parasects? I'm sure it's not irritating in the slightest, talking about 2 other subplots than the one that most audiences would actually be interested in, and the one they'd constantly be focusing on during the other 2, especially when one of them is the biggest waste of time that the series has to offer. Alright, let's talk about Rosemary and let's talk about Caroway.
Now we know.
And knowing is half the battle.
This plotline starts off when Rosemary ends up breaking the pommel on her mother's sword, Flowering Thorn. Now here's a fun fact. We learn in episode 6 that the blade is enchanted to never ever break. This enchantment doesn't apply to the hilt because, as we all know, a sword with a broken hilt is completely usable and doesn't hinder it in the slightest.
Quit worrying about getting that sword nicked up. Why don't you care about all the other scratches?
Come on guys, I'm trying to help you out here. You're better than this.
A worn weapon lets you know that it served its true purpose.
No. A worn weapon lets you know it needs to be repaired or replaced, or that the owner doesn't give a shit about it. People who actually care and use their weapons keep them in the most pristine condition that they possibly can, because the last thing that you want is your weapon to break on you when you need it most. I don't know if these are nitpicks, but if you know anything about like actual realistic battles or medieval combats, the shit this show tries to do will put a real bee up your bonnet. Lavender, we don't touch the blade like that. No, Lavender, get your hand off that thing. You're gonna cut yourself.
I've ruined the one thing that matters to me.
She says right in front of Sage, her best friend in the entire world. I mean, you could argue that you wouldn't refer to Sage as a quote-unquote thing that matters, but that's a very tenuous argument. Even if you wanted to ignore Sage, though, who, once again, is standing right there, you'd still have to deal with that whole cheesecake locket thing. I guess that thing doesn't matter to Rosemary. The show had multiple writers, and I'm beginning to suspect that none of them watched each other's episodes, because the continuity from episode to episode gets real fucked real fast. The sword breaking triggers a flashback.
Mom, look it! Mommy!
Okay, what the hell? I'm not trying to be mean, but what is this voice acting? It sounds like you're mocking a kid, not trying to act like one. Speaking of voice acting, there's this moment here.
I botched my mother's legacy.
This sounds like Rosemary is intentionally being overdramatic. You know, there's a degree of sarcasm in her voice. But in this moment, she really does think that she botched her mother's legacy by breaking the pommel on the sword. This is because Rosemary would never ever use the words botched my mother's legacy in earnest. Except, I guess, in this one wayward random moment.
All right, everything begins with your stance. Keep your stance wide. Keep your body lowered.
Did I mention that the show wears its inspirations on its sleeve? The lack of creativity still does continue to astound me.
I was just telling Sage how you chose enchanted marksmanship for everything hours.
Yeah, but I'm on my way to archery.
Get it? Time is an elf. Elves use bows. They don't need any characterization beyond that. Elf is archer, end of story. So Lavender has to go off to war, maybe it's never really specified. She does the smart thing, and she doesn't take her signature weapon with her. And she leaves it with her reckless child who nearly fell down the stairs with it. I love this scene, by the way. Caroway is walking so fast he's practically running, and then he slows down before the girls address him. Anyway, he wants to talk to Rosemary specifically about her choice for everything hours because, holy shit, they never gave him a reason. You could infer it's because he was friends with Lavender, but once again, it's something you have to infer. And even if you do, it's not like Caroway is Rosemary's godfather or anything. He doesn't give her any special tutorship later on or specialized classes. He just wants to know what everything hours activity she picks, and then that's it. I don't think they have another one-on-one conversation for the rest of the series. This whole thing would make a hell of a lot more sense if Rosemary sought out Caroway. I mean, he is an expert magic user. Rosemary could be pointed in his direction. We see a portrait of him when he attended Highgarden Academy. You could build up a bit of mystery and character towards who Caroway is. And in the end, we don't actually get much of that, beyond...
I'm transgender.
So let's talk about this moment. The most basic of issues is that this comes across as a lecture. It feels very much like we're watching Nick Jr., and Caroway is explaining to an audience rather than to the characters. Especially because Rosemary's dialogue, once again, isn't fitting.
I don't know that word.
It's out of character for Rosemary to admit that she doesn't know something, even to a teacher. She has a sense of arrogance about her. Her character has been changed here specifically to receive the message. It also doesn't help that this lecture doesn't really explain much.
I was born into a female body, but it wasn't the right body for me.
Does this explain anything to anyone? Like, anyone at all? If you haven't had experience with gender dysphoria or anything like that, you don't exactly know what "it wasn't the right body for me" really does mean. There's a YouTuber, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce this name, Jamie DeJonge. They've done rewrite animatics for several of the very infamous scenes of Highgarden Spice, including this one. In the redone animatic, it definitely explains Caroway's feelings quite a bit better. Just a few lines of dialogue are changed, but it profoundly changes the entire scene. Not only that, the redone animatic shows what Caroway is feeling, rather than just lecturing the audience. The scene actually uses the infinite magic that the show apparently has. The facial expressions that Caroway has while communicating this also help bring the scene to new heights. I think that I get where the writers were coming from on this scene. Caroway is a trans man, and that's something that you do have to establish. It'd be really not kosher to have a character on this show for its entire 12-episode run, never establish that they're trans, and then just, call them trans later. It's something that goes against literally everything a show like this stands for, so it's something they never ever do. Not in a million years ever. Ahem. What was that? But Caroway being trans has nothing to do with this scene. So it comes across as just trying to establish that Caroway is a trans man and move along as fast as possible. Basically to just get it out of the way. Which makes the whole scene extremely awkward and clumsy. It's very tell over show. And there's a very easy way to have show over tell with this specific scenario. This episode tries to do a lot. We've established that it has 4 different storylines. But even Rosemary's subplot alone tries to do a lot. It tries to bring depth to Lavender and Caroway, and establishing their friendship, and help prod Rosemary in a specific direction in her education, and a lot more. But because the subplot is so rushed and half-assed, it does all of these things very half-assed. We get a backstory with Caroway and Lavender fighting a manticore, that ends up showing the pommel of the sword being broken back then too. Lavender breaking the sword herself is not important.
Why don't you care about all the other scratches?
This one line of dialogue reestablishes everything that's been seen so far. The backstory is yet another waste of time in the episode. A much better backstory that puts together all of the disparate parts of the subplot would be Caroway's trans realization. You could still have your action scenes while doing that by taking advantage of the genre of fantasy. A monster could quote-unquote curse Caroway by changing his sex, which eventually leads to him realizing who he truly is and all the feelings that could come with that. You can go into a backstory of Lavender and Caroway searching for a quote-unquote cure that Caroway wants less and less as time goes on. It would require more screen time than the plot currently got, but you could just cut Parsley's out. This is just one possibility among many, but it is so much better than just talking at Rosemary and by extension the audience. In this scenario, it's something that Caroway could confide to Lavender about, which shows their friendship probably stronger than just fighting a manticore did. It gives Caroway revealing that he's trans some actual narrative purpose as well. But more importantly, it gives Caroway an actual character, because he doesn't have much otherwise. I keep saying that a lot in this episode, but I really am trying to give the show as much benefit of the doubt as I can. I think they try to make him the quote-unquote understanding teacher, kind of like Lupin, but we really don't have enough moments in the show that showcase that. It's just this episode, episode 11, and the finale. And 2 out of 3 of those are discussions about being trans. I don't know if I'm confident in arguing that Caroway is a token, but I do feel that he comes too close for comfort. And there's also this issue.
Is that kind of transformation magic permanent?
I take a potion once a month to keep the spell active.
Once again, new magic has no cost my ass. New magic can do anything you want to do, except change someone's physical body permanently, because we need it to be a direct stand-in. Get it? It's a metaphor.
I don't know that word.
Of course you don't. For the most part, I don't think that the show is intentionally malicious. It comes across as more clueless a lot of the times. Its decisions and its mistakes do end up sending very bad, unfortunate implications. This goes down to even the warning that we get at the start of every single episode. It should be noted that episode 3 is the first time that we see blood, and it's the first time that we hear her swear. Sort of.
Holy crap.
We've been hearing crap on kids' shows for a very long time now.
If you need me, I will be in the science lab.
What's this crap?
We're trapped in here day after day, doing boring stuff and standing in lines for cold, crappy food that they don't even give me time to eat.
Is step 3 really all that?
Shit. It ain't no step for a stepper.
And nowadays, even kids' shows can say that word openly.
Who you calling? The master prank caller. Holy crap.
And the blood, that shoots you up from a Y to a Y7. Episode 1 and 2 of High Guardian Spice are very G-rated. Ignoring the almost potion murder, there's no violence, there's no cursing, and the themes are heavily about love and friendship. This wouldn't be out of place on Nick Jr. And yet, the show requires a warning about sexual content. This sounds like a complete segue, but have you ever heard of the movie Love is Strange? It's a 2014 romantic drama. It was rated R by the MPAA in America, solely because 2 gay men kiss and sleep in a bed together, totally clothed. And this isn't the only time the MPAA has rated a movie R for these reasons. Can I ask you a question? What's the difference between that and this? Spoiler alert, there is no sexual content in any episode of High Guardian Spice. Not once in any of the 12 episodes. There's literally even only 1 kiss in the entire series. There is violence, blood, and peppered in swearing. Even alcohol is mentioned at one point, but no sexual content. Which means this warning isn't just mimetic and stupid, it's a lie. And a dirty one. The only way that you can think that it's not a lie is if you think that an LGBT character just existing is quote-unquote sexual content by their existence alone. The quote-unquote adult content in the show has been subject to controversy and debate. The creator has said that Crunchyroll had pushed them to include more and more adult content as the show went on, which is an excuse that has never been used in history ever. Although the specific content here is so forced and half-assed that it's an actually believable excuse here. At the same time, I have no idea why Crunchyroll specifically would want the show to have an edge. Crunchyroll isn't adult anime all the time. They have shows that are aimed at a younger audience, like Digimon or Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Bananya. What? Once again, I don't think that the show is being intentionally malicious, but these mistakes and these missteps do have the potential to be more than funny haha memes. When you bungle a good message as badly as High Guardian Spice does, You create bad messages. And spoiler alert, things are going to get a lot worse before the series is over.